On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, disruptions of shipping routes in the Red Sea, Black Sea, and Panama Canal are having an impact on global trade. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade and Development, have a new report out entitled Navigating Troubled Waters. We're going to take a look at that data and show exactly how much the disruptions caused by the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, the low water levels in the Panama Canal, and now the third year of conflict on the Black Sea have impacted the global trade and shipping. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So probably my favorite infographic that they included in this report is this one right here, how a single attack on a commercial shipping has worldwide impacts. And so they weave together this narrative where they talk about shipping being a highly international business. And, a typical ship, for example, can be built in the Republic of Korea, crewed by Filipino seafarers, recruited through a crewing agency in Cyprus, owned by a German investment fund, inspected by an Indian classification society under the flag of the Marshall Islands, while insured by Protection and Indemnity Club in Norway, fueled at a bunkering station in Singapore, and operated by a liner shipping firm out of Denmark, hauling cargo for thousands of different people and companies across the entire planet. This is why when anything happens to shipping, it has a worldwide impact. And this chart does a great job in breaking this down so that you can see exactly in 5 different key areas how much of the world is directly involved in shipping. So, example, if you look at shipbuilding around the world, well, there are 3 countries that do the bulk of shipbuilding. China, which builds 47% of the world's ships, Korea, which does 29%, and then Japan, which does 7%. Ownership, 17% is done by Greece, 13% by China, 11% by Japan, and 4% by Korea. If you look at registration of ships, 3 countries are really where the bulk of ships are registered. 17% are in Liberia, 16% in Panama, 13% in the Marshall Islands, 5% in China. 3 countries are responsible for recycling most of the world's fleets. Bangladesh does 38%, India does 31%, and Pakistan 17%. And then where do our 1.6 or so million seafarers come from? 13% come from the Philippines, 10% come out of Russia, 7% out of China, 8% out of Indonesia, and 6% out of India. And while those countries have a direct influence in shipping, obviously consumer nations in North America, in Europe, and East Asia are all interacted together along with markets in South America, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. So this is a global impact that we see in shipping, but you can see how some countries have a little bit more influence in it than others. So let's take a look at the report and get into some details here. And I'll, of course, have the entire report available to you so that you can download it. So 2 months into 2024, the Red Sea and Suez Canal disruption that began in November of 2023 continues to unfold, putting at risk the free movement of goods and interwoven global supply chains. The Red Sea disruption comes on top of disruptions that are already constraining vessel crossing in the Panama Canal and the war in Ukraine, affecting activity in the Black Sea. If sustained, these disruptions of key international maritime waterways could cause greater upheaval in global supply chains. Transits are currently down by more than 40%, almost 50% for Panama in the 2 main international canals. Suez Canal down about 42% from its peak. Meanwhile, the Panama Canal is down nearly 49%. In the Suez Canal, most of the decline in transits occurred over the last 2 months, while transits through the Panama Canal have been decreasing over the last 2 years. In the Suez Canal, as container trade flows dominate that canal's traffic, the response has been immediate, with container ships shunning the Suez and rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope due to the attacks launched by the Houthi. By the first half of February 2024, container tonnage crossing the canal fell by 82%. This graphic shows you the movement of container ships of over 13,500 TEUs. These are 20-foot equivalent units from December of 2023 all the way to February of 2024. In 2023, 26,000 container vessels crossed the Suez Canal. Bulk carriers accounted for 28% of the total traffic, oil tankers 24%, and container ships 23%. In terms of gross tonnage, container ships accounted for the largest share at 43%, followed by oil tankers at 23%, and bulk carriers at 19%. In 2023, 22% of the global seaborne container trade is estimated to have traveled through the canal. We also see a large percentage of liquefied natural gas and oil tankers going through, about 10% of LNG, about 9% of oil tankers, and about 4% of liquefied petroleum gas carriers and car carriers use the canal extensively. This impact on the Suez Canal means that shipping tonnage entering the Gulf of Aden has declined by over 70% between the first half of December 2023 to the first half of February 2024. Vessel tonnage passing around the Cape of Good Hope has increased by 60%, and by 18 February of 2024, some 621 container ships have been rerouted. Now, developments in the Red Sea come at the same time the Panama Canal transits are also under pressure. The canal has been facing low water levels caused by drought, and to save on water, the Panama Canal Authority has reduced the number of vessel transits. Normally, about 13,000 transits per year take place. That accounts for about 5% of the global trade. Yet the number of transits across the Panama Canal were reduced from a daily average of 36 down to 22. Now, as these diversions and these reductions took place, ships rerouted themselves to head through the Suez Canal. However, with the Suez Canal now being disrupted, this is forcing ships to take that longer transit around the Cape of Good Hope. The United States is the largest client of the Panama Canal, accounting for 72% of the volume of cargo that goes through the canal in 2021. This volume corresponds to approximately 12% of the United States' trade volume in terms of tonnage. The second most important Panama Canal user is China, accounting for 22.5% of the canal's cargo volume. For China, this represents 3% of exports and 1.5% of imports. But more importantly, the Panama Canal is absolutely crucial to countries along the west coast of South America, with Chile having 22% of its imports coming through the Panama Canal, Peru 21.8%, and Ecuador 25.6%. In the United States, this has kicked up the demand for rail transportation services as shipping has moved from going through the Suez and the Panama Canal are now using the land bridge, which connects the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach in the U.S. to the larger North America. We're also seeing this in Canadian ports like Vancouver and to a lesser extent some other ports along the west coast of the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We're even seeing the offloading of cargo in Panama so that the larger Neo-Panamax vessels can come up in their draft, get through the canal, and then load their cargo on the other side. In terms of the Suez Canal, this is having a major impact on nations like Egypt, where the canal is a massive revenue generator for the country. It contributes about $9.4 billion over the last fiscal year. That's equivalent to 2.3% of the nation's GDP in 2023. The Red Sea crisis has reportedly triggered a 40% drop in Suez Canal revenues. A deteriorating situation in Egypt could have negative spillover effects for other countries in the region, such as Ethiopia and Sudan. And this chart shows you the amount of trade that's imported through the Suez Canal to these countries, with Sudan getting almost 34% of its trade through the Suez Canal, Yemen 31.6%, all the way down to the Seychelles there at 19.7%. One of the other unintended consequences of all these actions is that rerouting ships increases distances and causes operational shifts. So, for example, an oil tanker going from the port of Ras Tanura in Saudi Arabia to Rotterdam in the Kingdom of Netherlands, that distance is going to go up. It's going to, if you can go through the Suez Canal, you cut that distance by 42%. If a container ship goes from Singapore to Rotterdam, using the Suez cuts the route by 20%. 29%. If you have to go this longer route, what this means is the requirement for vessels and ships goes up. A round trip between India and Europe, for instance, takes 56 days and requires 8 vessels a year to be able to conduct this service. If the trip extends to 63 days, you have to throw another vessel into the mix. Add to this, we're seeing a dislocation of trade. For example, grain to Egypt is now sourced from Brazil or the United States instead of Ukraine because of the distance involved, while Russian oil shipments are destined for India and China instead of Europe. These extra miles and days translate into additional costs, such as fuel costs, lost value of time-sensitive cargo. Other additional costs arise from the prevailing security considerations, including the risk of piracy off the coast of Africa. These conditions generate a surge in insurance and legal claims for companies whose vessels are delayed. Shipments are disrupted, ships damaged, and cargo spoiled. These increased distances are leading to significant ton-mile demand, the amount of miles you have to ship a ton of cargo. This can add up to 10% to global container TEU mile trade. Practically no liquefied natural gas carriers are using the Suez Canal at present. Bulk carriers, which is not that dependent on the Suez route and has low exposure to these disruptions, have seen limited market impact so far. However, after this report was released, we've seen a surge in bulk carrier attacks, which means that we can see disruptions in that trade happening. The number of specialized car-carrying ships using the Red Sea was cut by more than half in December of 2023 as compared with December of 2022, a year earlier. So for over the past decade, one of the features we've been seeing across shipping has been the onus to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and cut vessel speed. This has been done through the International Maritime Organization through their IMO 2020 and 2023 initiatives. But now these longer routes are causing vessels to sail at higher rates at speed. For a large container ship, a 1% speed increase typically results in a 2.2% rise in fuel consumption. An increase from 14 to 16 knots, for example, would increase ship consumption per mile by 31%. In this context, longer distances traveled due to rerouting from the Suez and through the Cape of Good Hope imply that emissions for a round trip, say from Singapore to Northern Europe, could rise by 70% per trip. And again, we're seeing that spike happen right now with ships heading around having to make up time. Therefore, they're steaming more. Plus, the European Union has imposed a carbon tax on vessels coming in, and due to IMO 2023, ships have to keep up with their scores of their carbon emissions, and those are calculated at the end of every year. If we look at just container rates, the container rates on the Asia Pacific to Europe routes have increased significantly since November of 2023. In the last week of December 2023, average container spot rates surged by $500. This was the highest ever weekly increase compared to what we saw happening back during the supply chain crisis. You can see how much different this is. It is a much faster rate of growth than we've seen before. Average container spot rates from Shanghai more than doubled, plus 122% between early December 2023 and early February 2024. The Shanghai to Europe jumped by 256%, more than tripling. The ripple effects were felt in distant locations such as the Asia to U.S. West Coast routes. Rates to the U.S. West Coast increased by 130% since early November 2023. In other areas, we're seeing the same thing. Cost of insurance and coverage has been impacted. War prices jumped in the final weeks of 2023, with a transit through the Red Sea now attracting a premium of above 0.3% of a ship's value, double what was charged in mid-October, and higher than before 7 October. By early February 2024, some reports indicate premiums rising from about 0.7% to 1% of a vessel's value from under 0.1%. Additionally, we're seeing inflationary pressure being put on food and energy prices. The crisis is also reverberating in global food prices, with longer distances and higher freight rates potentially cascading into increased costs. Disruptions in grain shipments from the Russian Federation, Ukraine, and Europe pose risks to the global food security. Finally, the report ends up the current overlapping disruptions to international shipping routes and maritime choke points are causing an exceptionally challenging operating landscape for shipping and trade. Two major maritime trade waters face disruptions at the same time. In addition, these waterways are also still adjusting to network configurations and trade pattern shifts caused by the earlier disruption in the Black Sea. Developing countries are particularly vulnerable to these disruptions. The impact of these combined disruptions has not reached the level of the disruption caused by the pandemic or the consequent global logistics crunch of 2021 and 2022. So a really interesting report put out by UNCTAD. Again, I'll have the entire report available to you. You can go ahead and digest your way through it. But I think what you're getting from this is the implications of a myriad of crises. The Black Sea, the Panama Canal, the Red Sea are all impacting global shipping. And the concern that we should have is if there's any other issues that come forward, this would cause even further disruptions. Right now, we're seeing the global trade adjust. They're adjusting to the diversions around the Red Sea. We've adjusted to the Black Sea over the past 2 years. Panama Canal is down. That's going to be that way for at least 6 more months until we hit the chance to start hitting the wet season and start getting some water back in the canal, hopefully. But right now, if any other crisis happens, it's not clear what kind of disruption it'd have. And matter of fact, it would probably be a distorted impact, much higher than it normally would be because the system is in such a precarious situation. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you can hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until our next video, this is Sal, signing off.